Hi everyone, welcome to MSL2 Live. This is Mert Yeter from MSL2. Today we have a very special guest. It's Hayden Barnes from Canonical. So Hayden, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Really excited about it.
We are very excited as well. Can you tell me about yourself a bit?
So I'm a developer advocate for Ubuntu on WSL, that is Windows Subsystem for Linux. My role also touches on Hyper-V at Canonical. That is the company that makes Ubuntu.
So you have a very cool title, and as far as I can see from your LinkedIn profile, you have graduated from School of Law and you're a former lawyer. And how did you make that switch to the technical role, and how did you get a job at Canonical?
So I made the transition to technology. Technology has always been a hobby of mine. I've been programming in, I started in QBasic when I was, 13 on DOS and got hooked from there. And it had always been a personal passion project, particularly Linux and open source. And I never really saw it as a career opportunity. I didn't go to school for computers or computer science, but I still maintained my skills. I took some certification classes. I dove in, and eventually I had an idea for a WSL specific distro and created Penguin as kind of a hobby. And that we decided to actually list on the store for sale, the Microsoft store, and generate revenue to create a sustainable project. And that actually then took off based in part on the rise of WSL as a platform. And it very quickly became my full-time job, kind of by accident. And we ended up building a small worldwide team and developing that and getting some traction with that. Later, Ubuntu, Canonical, noticed what we were doing and gave me the opportunity to come over to Ubuntu on WSL and continue elevating WSL to the community and having some additional resources. So Penguin is still out there. The developer that was helping me with that is now in charge of it. We're still friends, that's still out there. But now I lead efforts on Ubuntu on WSL, and it's been very exciting. It combines kind of my probably 20 years of Linux, open source, operating system nerdiness with my skills talking and working with people, building consensus that comes from my legal background.
Okay, what do you think about Microsoft Law Linux, and what is it like working with Microsoft on open source projects?
So Microsoft embrace of open source has been, I think, one of the major tech stories of the last decade. You begin to see Microsoft making a change about 8-9 years ago, laying the foundations of it. But with their acquisition of things like GitHub and NPM, development of WSL, and work on Azure, the open sourcing of their primary development platform, .NET. You've seen them go all in on Linux and open source, and it is a complete 180. But having come from previously the Apple ecosystem, I can say that Microsoft feels much more open and accessible, in terms of being able to talk to the people who are making the tools that I need, and having those feature requests, considered. I could put them in on GitHub. Sometimes when I would encounter a problem at Apple within the Apple ecosystem, I would file a bug report and it would go unanswered for months, sometimes years. But in the Microsoft ecosystem, in a lot of cases, I know who exactly to talk to. So if I have a bug with PowerToys, I can ping Clint Rutkus or file a GitHub issue and link to him. So it feels not only that they've embraced open source, but they are individually and as an organization open, transparent, and accessible. And I feel really honored to have an opportunity to collaborate with them on Linux, on open source, because Ubuntu is the default VM on Azure, and Linux is about 50% or more, depending on the workload each day, of Azure VMs. So Linux has seeped into their DNA, and we make the coolest Linux. So it's a fun collaboration.
Okay, cool. So Ubuntu is a huge ecosystem. So what do you think? How does Ubuntu on WSL fit into it?
Oops. What was that?
Ubuntu has a huge ecosystem. And
right.
How does Ubuntu on WSL fit into it?
I see. So I imagine Linux as a big pie, and in that pie, the biggest piece is server. A rapidly growing piece is Internet of Things, IoT. A piece of that, a sizable piece of that, is workstation. And I see WSL as a new slice of that pie. And what we're trying to do is bring people who are on Windows for a variety of reasons, whether that's application support, limitations imposed by their employer, specific hardware support, and we want to bring them into the Linux and open source ecosystem and give them the tools they need to be successful and productive. And when it comes to development for server applications, WSL is starting to fill that role. IoT, robotics, we are starting to see people not only using WSL to build cross-platform applications for Linux and Windows desktop, but server applications, IoT solutions, robotics, and system administration too. If you throw WSL on a Surface tablet, it makes a really great data center device to carry around with you. And then you have access to both your Windows and your Linux tools at the same time. So I see it at a minimum as a power user utility, but really it plugs you into the rest of Linux and the rest of the ecosystem. It gives you an onboarding ramp. This will be particularly useful for people who are just learning Linux, just becoming used to the command line, and might not necessarily want to dual boot or have a secondary machine that they can install Linux on, on bare metal, or don't want to pay for a virtual private server. You can run the Linux terminal, on what you have right now. So I think it also plays a significant role in education and development of new skills.
If someone says Canonical, everybody knows that it's the company behind Ubuntu. Are there other exciting things happening at Canonical?
So Canonical makes Ubuntu, and we have Ubuntu 20.04 coming next month. That's currently codenamed Focal Fossa. That is the next long-term stable support version of Ubuntu. It will be supported for 5 years. In between, we have interim releases with the latest software for testing. But the LTS releases are what you're going to see on servers and dedicated workstations. We also have a wide array of utilities to manage those desktops, like Landscape. We also have our Kubernetes solution, which is Juju. And we are starting to look at opportunities to collaborate between WSL and managing Juju in the cloud. So we have not just Ubuntu, but a kind of a whole range of administration and Kubernetes solutions. One of my favorites is MicroK8s. MicroK8s is a single Kubernetes cluster that you can spin up on your workstation for development very simply. Now, it doesn't work inside WSL yet, and I'll get to some of the limitations in WSL and how you choose the right tool for the job later. But MicroK8s is one of those interesting things that Ubuntu is working on that some people might not be aware of, that's also available from Canonical.
Okay, Aidan, thank you. Before you start your demo presentation, I want to ask you, how does WSL work, and what can I do in WSL as a developer?
Okay, well, WSL, there's actually two WSLs. There's WSL, the original, and WSL 2, which is coming in the next version, release version of Windows, and they work very differently. The first version of WSL, WSL 1, is a system call translation layer. So it is not a virtual machine, and it is not an emulator. It is executing Linux binaries on the fly. It is parsing them, but it is then translating the system calls that would normally go to the Linux kernel and transforming them into NT system calls for the NT kernel. And this works pretty well. Unfortunately, there's a lot of non-standard system calls. So there's some edge cases that aren't supported by WSL. And that's where WSL 2 comes into play. WSL 2 is not a system call translation layer. I guess the best analogy for the system call translation layer would be something like Wine on Linux, which re-implements the Windows API. They're not system calls, but it's still a re-implementation of the layer that's translated. And then WSL 2 is based on Hyper-V VM technology. So it is actually running in a Hyper-V layer on the Hyper-V platform, and it has a native Linux kernel provided by Microsoft that is running live. So you get full system call support and much greater performance. So the thing is some people will still be well suited to WSL 1. WSL 1 is still a great product, and it's still a good platform. Sometimes I leave some instances on 1 and some instances on 2, and it's kind of hard to tell the difference unless you're doing a lot of high performance stuff. Then that's when WSL 2 really shines. But for day-to-day, you can't really tell a lot of difference. You want to pick based on what you need. So WSL 2 running in a VM has its own virtualized network. So sometimes you have to go through a little extra step if you're connecting to a service inside of it, but it's still going to be a significant improvement over WSL. For developers, what WSL provides is full access to the Linux open source platform. So you have access to the entire Ubuntu package archive, and that includes development tools, things like compilers, linters, debuggers, and you can run these all natively. And they increasingly integrate with Windows side tools like Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio, JetBrains IDEs, and you really unlock the potential of a Windows workstation when you enable WSL, because it gives you the best of both worlds.
So what about Docker?
About what?
Docker desktop.
Okay, so the new Docker desktop is actually powered on WSL2. So it has a small WSL distribution that powers it, and then it links to your existing WSL distros. And it's very powerful, very fast, and it is built directly on this WSL2 platform. We are seeing more and more development tools build directly on the WSL platform. So not just Docker, but for example, Uno develops tools in the .NET ecosystem, and they have cross-platform tools now that are based by connecting to WSL. So WSL is quickly becoming part of the mesh of Windows development across the board as we see more integrations, things like Docker plugging directly in and speeding that up significantly.
So can you show us some stuff on WSL?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So let me do a quick share. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Yes, we can see now.
Okay. So what we have here is the new terminal. This is a brand new terminal that's coming from Microsoft. It's available in the Microsoft Store under Preview. So you can get it here on the Microsoft Store. And I am in Ubuntu right now on WSL. This is WSL 2, and I can show you that here. It's giving me. So you can see I have a standard Ubuntu image and a preview image of Ubuntu Focal. That's what's going to become Ubuntu 2004 in a couple days, and I'll show you how to manually import these images in a moment. But this is the new terminal, and this is running Ubuntu Focal Fossa. And just like you would on any regular Ubuntu machine, you would run sudo apt update to update your repos. I can remember my own password. There we go. So you can actually see in my sources that I've got the Azure repo enabled. I've also got the official Google Dartlang repo enabled. Oh, and look, I've got 40 packages that can be upgraded. So I can just do sudo apt upgrade. Yes. And it would upgrade just like it would any other distribution. So we'll leave that where it is for now. Let's see, my SSH. All right, so cancel that. So you can also see that I am in my users folder. So WSL automatically mounts the C drive. So you have your home folder, of course, which you would have your typical Linux home folder, but your C drive and other drives can be mounted. The C drive is mounted automatically under Mount C. So this might be strange for people to see, but you have your C drive right here, along with your program files, Windows, and of course you can go into your folder, not dir, and you have your documents and your OneDrive and your other files. So you're able to here interact with in your Windows and your Linux file systems without having to install any sort of extensions or anything. It just happens out of the box. One thing I would note is that if you are doing a lot of development work, like with large Git commits or large Git histories, I strongly recommend moving them over to the WSL side, because the cross file system I/O will always be somewhat of a bottleneck on WSL. So for big applications that you're building, I recommend you download the source, you Git clone it directly on your WSL home drive, home folder, not on Windows. And if you have it on Windows, copy it over. So let's see. So I have a folder here with a little tiny application I wrote that I'm working on called WSL conf that helps parse the WSL config file, and it's written in nim, and compiled it. It didn't find what it was looking for, so it threw an exception. So what we can do is let's go open code. Now this is Visual Studio Code, and it has an extension called Remote WSL, and it's very popular. It just passed 2 million users, and it allows us to connect directly into our WSL instance. So I'm going to click Remote, and do New Window using distro. I'm in my Focal distro. Okay, and then we're going to open a folder. And I'm actually opening this folder from Linux. So if I want to access my files back on Windows, I will need to go do that. There we go. Documents. Okay. It's also possible to just do, in some cases, code dot, and it will open it automatically for you. Okay. So this opened directly from WSL. We're connected to my WSL instance, Ubuntu Focal, and here's my code. And one of the nice things is that code is aware of the different line endings, so it will automatically translate back and forth between Unix style line endings and Windows line endings so that you don't end up with a mess. And let me change into my user here. And I can debug my code right here inside code with the terminal right next to each other. So WSL comp found. WSL comp. So it's not finding WSL conf because it's not there. So let's go create it, and we can do something like nano accept conf. So make that sudo. All right, so this is WSL.conf is where you can customize some of the settings in WSL. For example, setting your WSL2 the maximum amount of memory you want your VM to use. You can also specify a custom kernel. If there are special hooks in a kernel you need that the standard Microsoft kernel doesn't provide, you can also do things like auto mount and of your other WSL distros and do cross distro file systems. So let's pick one. Let's do we want that to be true. Exit, save that, and then rerun our script. Okay, so yep, so our application now, my little application that detects the settings in WSL conf, it found WSL conf, and it found that generate resolve conf was enabled. So we can do this all from directly inside code, and you can really do a lot with this. You can write code, you can develop Ansible scripts, you can automate your Azure deployment. So for example, you can install Azure CLI and automate on Windows your Azure tools. So if you are familiar with Bash, but want to manage those deployments from Windows, you have Azure Cloud Shell, but if you want to use the performance of your machine, you can do that locally. So there's that. So then I want to show couple other things. So a lot of these things I'm showing can be found at the Ubuntu Wiki on the WSL page. Here we have some of the explanations about the difference between WSL1 and WSL2. I show here how to enable WSL in the GUI or PowerShell. We also link to Microsoft's official guides. We generally recommend you install an LTS from the store. We have 1604 right now and 1804 in the store, and we also have our rolling release version, which is just Ubuntu, and that will always upgrade you to the most recent LTS. So right now the main Ubuntu is on 1804, but in a few months it'll upgrade you to 2004 when our 2004 LTS becomes available. There's a couple other ways to install these images. One is to directly import a rootfs tar file directly into the WSL API. So, like I said, we only release the long-term stable versions officially for WSL, but let's say you wanted to try Ubuntu 19.10. That's the version from just late last year. It's the current interim release of Ubuntu. Its codename was Eon Ermine. Let's say you wanted to install that on WSL. What would you do if it's not available on the store? You can go to our Ubuntu cloud images. These are our daily builds. And you can actually find here, we make a rootfs tarball available just for WSL. And I went ahead and downloaded that to my downloads. And I'm going to jump over into command. And you see I have Ubuntu Focal, Ubuntu and Ubuntu Focal right now. And we're going to import this tarball that's in my downloads. Let's see if I can do this without checking the documentation. Let's see, Ubuntu Eon, and we're going to put it at CWSL Ubuntu Eon, and it's at C users, hey, downloads. No. There it is. And then I want to import this as WSL 1 so I can show the conversion. So no, I got something wrong on the import. Okay, so it's going to import it. So my default version is 2, so it's going to import it as 2, but then I'm going to show how easily you can convert distros between 1 and 2. So if I go back and now repeat, okay, so I now have Ubuntu Eon 19.10 running, or installed, and I can run it with D. Okay, and I am in now in 19.10. So that's how easy it is to install WSL distros from those rootfs tarballs. Now let's exit that. You see how easily I'm jumping back and forth between WSL and the command prompt. It's you can not only can you call WSL from the command prompt, but you can also then call back to Windows by just putting .exe back on that file, and your environmental variables are shared between the two environments. So it's really becoming an integrated development experience. But let me show you how we convert .exe set version. So we're going to convert this back to 1, WSL 1. That's the system call translation layer. It'll take a couple minutes to do that. But I wanted to show how easy it was to convert between the two, because right now WSL2 is only available on the insiders. So you have to be on at least insider slow to get WSL2, but WSL2 should be landing in Windows 2004, which is previously codenamed 20H1, sometime in May. So we're a few weeks away from it. I'm currently on Insider Slow because I just prefer a slightly more stable machine than what you can encounter on the fast ring. But you have that option. So we'll leave that running for now. One of the cool things you can do that I have a great demo of in the wiki is compile and test cross-platform applications. So a lot of tools, especially in Linux, allow you to build for Windows under or small Windows binaries. So you can actually, with tools, test and build versions for Linux and Windows side by side. And that, I think, is really going to benefit both ecosystems, because you no longer have to wait for applications to be ported. because you can just run them out of the box in a lot of cases.
Hayden, we have a question. Is there a restriction for using the Linux distribution? So can we use other distros not included in the Windows market?
Yes. So Windows, the Microsoft Store has a diverse array, has Ubuntu, SUSE, Kali, Debian, and let's see, Alpine. But you can certainly install rootfs tarballs like the one you see here from Ubuntu. I see people using Arch, Clear Linux. In fact, one of the tools that Ubuntu makes is something called LXD. It is a Linux container platform that builds on the LXC containers, and it actually has rootfs tarballs as part of the deployment. So you can actually, here's a great tutorial on WSL.dev from my friend Nuno on how to actually install Fun2, which is a Gentoo derivative, by exporting the rootfs tarball from LXD on WSL back into WSL. So you can download these rootfs tarballs and create them, rootfs tarballs and import them, or create them manually. I sometimes create them with Distro Builder, which is another tool from Canonical in LXD. So you can create YAML images, a little bit of YAML that can then easily build your own custom image just for WSL. And we're starting to see some enterprise customers do that as well as they begin, as enterprise begins to adopt WSL. Let me go back and check and see. So it's taking a little while on that conversion back and forth. It can take a few minutes to go back and forth between 1 and 2. Something else some people might be interested to know is that you can run some GUI apps. So right now I have X410 running, and let's see, I could do something. Let's see, let's say I wanted to open my code. There we go. I can open it in gedit. So this is GNOME. If you are familiar with GNOME, you might recognize this. And I can browse. You see Mount C, users, Hayden, OneDrive. Yes. So I can browse my whole Windows file system, and I can also go back to my Linux file system and see everything there. So that's all native. There's no GPU acceleration, so I don't recommend running. Things like, I see some people who really want to run things like Chrome or Spotify, and that's not really what it's intended for. It's really intended for the terminal and integration with other tools. It is possible to run things like, you could, if you wanted to, run a small Linux GUI launcher on your desktop side by side with your Windows launcher, and have Linux GUI apps pinned and run, and most of them work okay. Some of them still don't. Let's see.
So we have a new question. The Corsair asks, will Ubuntu consider adding intermediate distros in the store?
So what was that?
So the question is, will Ubuntu consider adding the intermediate distros in the store?
Let's see.
I think he means the Windows Market Store.
Okay, so are they in there? Is that the question?
Yes, I think the question is, do you add new distros in the store
Yeah.
other than this?
Do I use them? Oh yeah. So me, no, not a lot, not a lot of the
Yeah.
time. I use because I want to test Ubuntu, but there are certainly other app. There's Penguin. That's the one I made
Yeah.
before, and still managed by my friend Carlos. There is Fedora Remix. Fedora Remix is a Fedora Remix for WSL, maintained by the same team that maintains Penguin. There's also Penguin Enterprise, which is a CentOS compatible version. So, you really have a wide array of options. You also have SUSE and some other, I don't know what that is. That's new. That's not going to last long. That looks like an unofficial version of CentOS. Yeah, so there's other versions, and you have that ability to import with the. I think that's going to take a while on the conversion. So you have the import option as well. So whatever you can either use something like LexD to export a custom image. You can even use Docker files to build a custom WSL image that you can import. Some distros make a rootfs tarball available that you can import, and then sometimes you can use whatever native tools your distro has for building images, whether that's dbootstrap or live media creator or just DNF in a JRoot that you can then tar up and import. So you really aren't limited to what's just in the store. But Ubuntu is one of the few that's actually actively supported and developed. Some of the other distros, unfortunately, they're kind of considered kind of an afterthought, the fact that they're in WSL. But Canonical has a dedicated team to Ubuntu on WSL with an engineer, myself, and product manager. So we're just a lot more active on WSL than some of the other distros. Oh, okay. So our conversion back to 1 for our image that we just imported is done. Let's go run it. And you'll see there's fundamentally no change in the experience. It's still Eon. Run apt update. But if we exit and look at our WSL config, we see it's running on 1. So we're actually running WSL 1 and 2 images side by side here. And we can convert those back and forth. So you can convert those easily back and forth between 1 and 2. So when 2 comes, you can use the set version command to quickly upgrade your distro to 2. And if you encounter any problems, you can quickly roll back. So if you do have issues on WSL, I strongly recommend you consult the WSL issues page on the GitHub. If there is an issue, it's probably been mentioned here, so search for it. There's advice, and if you can't find it, please open a new issue so we can take a look. A lot of times it's third-party security software that causes issues, and sometimes so for example, WSL, I see a lot of issues with third-party security software like ESET and Kaspersky particularly, they don't like some of the things WSL is doing behind the scenes and can cause networking issues. So if you have third-party security software and you're running into networking issues, try disabling it first and see what happens. But this is where I recommend people look for and tag issues in addition to the wiki. So some of the limitations in WSL, for example, include there's no init. So if we do PSA, we've got a tiny init that's just enough to start our bash. That's all it does. There's no systemd, there's no sysv init. There's when you launch Ubuntu or any of the other distros, it jumps straight to the bash terminal. It's not doing much else. So if you want to start services, you have to do them manually. And if there are some services that just won't play on WSL. So systemd right now is not well supported. There are some hacks to get you started, but if you have a hard dependency on systemd, it's just not going to work for you. In that case, we have other alternatives. So for example, Canonical also makes multipass. Multipass is a mini cloud for Mac and Windows. And if you are developing for the cloud and you encounter limitations on WSL that you can overcome, I strongly recommend you check out Multipass. Now, Multipass is specifically for cloud development and is powered by Cloud Init. If you're developing for workstations or need something more, graphical, we have the Hyper-V Quick Create images. These are images in the Hyper-V Quick Create gallery right here. And you'll see you have Windows 10 development and Ubuntu, the only two here. And you can, with these, quickly download in Hyper-V a full Ubuntu desktop experience that is that gives you the entire stack. So if you need systemd or need nested virtualization, this is what it can provide for now. So that will spin up, and it also gives you by default enhanced an enhanced session, so you get dynamic screen resolution, clipboard, copy and paste, that kind of thing. It's really nice. It's close to an experience like VirtualBox with guest tools enabled, or Parallels, or VMware Fusion. So we have a wide array of tools available for running basically Ubuntu on whatever ecosystem you want, based on what you intend to do, whether it's WSL, Multipass, or Hyper-V. So we really want to be able to reach developers wherever they are. But WSL is really cool.
So Aidan, what about the security? I mean, if I run a managed software in WSL, do I need to consider about Windows?
So the security on WSL, your Windows, your Linux instance has full access to your Windows side. And if you elevate your privileges, it has elevated privileges on Windows as well. So if you have security concerns, you can do things like disable the mounting of your C drive. The good news is that Microsoft Defender, built into Windows, is also actively monitoring WSL. So for example, if you were to download a compromised NPM package for Node containing a like a crypto miner that was embedded, say a GitHub account was compromised and someone placed a crypto miner in an NPM dependency, and you went to install it in your node project, Windows Defender will actually pick that up heuristically, that something is suspicious, and stop it inside WSL. So you have the protections of Windows Defender inside WSL, and you can customize additional security. Things like AppArmor and SE Linux aren't there yet, but I think that's interested in. I think people are interested in building out more of the security story over time. So another thing that's missing in WSL is sound. There is some very enterprising hackers that have gotten Pulse Audio up and working. We have some steps on how to do that. That's not officially supported though, in addition to the graphical applications. So, there are people who go all out and have side-by-side Linux, Windows workstations, on their desktop, in addition to just the command line. But I mostly just stick to the command line, because that gives you a lot of automation ability on Windows. I mean, even things like, so for example, my favorite, I install YouTube DL. I don't have it on Focal, but YouTube DL saves your offline, saves your favorite YouTube videos, and I will back those up. If there's a couple videos I want to take on a plane with me, and I don't know if they're going to have Wi-Fi on a short flight, I will go ahead and download a handful of YouTube videos and just have them on my laptop ready to watch. So there's just lots of little ways that WSL makes my life better, not just the code integration or the Visual Studio integration, but little handy tools like that. I mean, a lot of times I find myself configuring Windows from WSL.
So, is there a work on the next version, WSL 3? If so, can you give us some spoilers?
I wish. So WSL 2 is brand new, and I think there's going to be new features. So the key to new features is they're going to be announced at Build, and of course Build now is a. Let me switch back to my camera. Build is now a virtual event, so that means everyone can attend. And let's see. There we go. Have you got my camera back yet? There it is. So Build is now going to be a virtual event, and everyone can attend. And I strongly advise people who are interested in WSL to watch whatever presentation the team at Microsoft comes up with, Craig and Ben. So if there's going to be major announcements about the future of WSL, it's going to happen at Build. Okay. Oh, I see. I'm looking at some of the questions. Will Ubuntu consider adding the intermediate distros to the store? No, not at this time. That's a decision we've made to continue supporting the LTS only. Will any PowerShell 7 integrated commands, or do we have to use? Yeah, so you can install PowerShell just like you can on Linux, and it's open source now. PowerShell 7. I'm using PowerShell 7 on Windows right now. This is the command you use to enable WSL. That's in the docs. You can't see my screen anymore, but it's there. Let's see. Yeah, bash, I mean. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Do you have any more questions?
Oh, thank you. And it's a great honor to have you with us. And I want to thank you very much again.
Okay, thank you. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm at Unix Terminal on Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter, so if you ping me, I can answer quick questions. If you give me a big tech support issue, I'm going to tell you to go file an issue, and then I'll follow up with you there. But I'm pretty well accessible there. And just a few weeks ago, we had our first conference dedicated to WSL, and we will be putting those talks up on the Celebrate Ubuntu YouTube page in the next couple weeks as we get them edited and put up. So if you missed WSL Conf, those videos are coming up. And then you can also subscribe to my Twitter, and I will certainly be announcing when the next WSL Conf is happening. So there's things, exciting things happening in the WSL space. We're growing, we're bringing more people into the Linux ecosystem, and we're really excited to be partners with Microsoft and be out there in the community helping make this happen. So I really appreciate being on. I hope folks got a little bit of information out of this. Maybe in the future we can go a little bit more advanced. I can do some Docker. I can show some Docker work, maybe show some automated Azure if that's something people are interested in doing. I kind of wanted to touch on the basics now, and we can follow up later. How's that sound?
Okay, thank you very much, Aidan.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.